Flight. A dizzying somersault of lights, stars, and street lamps trading places as Paul was hauled aloft from the rooftop and carried screaming into the sky. His eyes and ears were filled with the icy rush of wind. His heart staggered mid-beat on the exhilaration of flight, as for a fleeting instant he had a view of all of Wendell spread out below him in its night colors, a horizon so vast he thought he could almost see the earth's curve. Then they plummeted together, Paul and this nightmare that had seized him, rushing earthward. He clamped his eyes shut against the stinging wind as they fell together, the creature's shriek keening like a hellbound missile, and then he was dropped. He fell, tumbling, while the nightmare that had released him corkscrewed with a shrieking hiss up and up and up like a mad balloon. Paul's death descent lasted only a fraction of a second. He landed hard on metal, bounced once, again, rolled. He was still alive, bruised, not broken. He flipped over quickly onto his stomach, saw pale painted metal beneath him, a horizon of steel glowing in the moonlight. His fingers found a welded seam. He pressed his cheek to the cool surface beneath him and waited for his heart to steady. Where the hell am I? The wind moaned in his ears. Wherever he was, he knew he was high above the world. Calmer now, he raised a hand and brought the heel of his palm down on the surface below him, heard the great echoing gong of hollowed metal, and then he understood where he'd been dropped, on top of a water tower. Time to think about climbing down from here. He slid forward across the painted dome on his belly, searching for a ladder. The wind came at him again, rising in pitch from the tremulous whistle to this keening shriek that wanted so badly to blow him off the tower. He shut his eyes against the stinging wind until it had subsided again. When he opened his eyes, there were tiny beads of moisture clinging to them, and his vision had sharpened. He began crawling on all fours, the metal painful against his knees. He crawled carefully, fighting that primitive part of him that wanted only to hold on for dear life. When he reached the curving edge of the dome, he dropped back down again, flattening himself to offer the least amount of surface area to the wind, then inched forward on his belly. His mind was beginning to play tricks on him, convincing him of sudden, unpredictable shifts in the metal surface so that he'd cry out and clutch the seams to keep from sliding. He braced himself against the vertigo and peered over. He saw a strip of railing a few yards down and a catwalk. If he could only find the utility ladder that led from the top of the dome to that catwalk, his chances of survival would suddenly leap into the double digits. He shimmied around the perimeter of the dome on his belly until he found the utility ladder. It curved up one side of the dome and flattened out like train tracks near the top. He hoisted himself up onto the horizontal ladder, the metal rungs thin and sharp as dowels. He began climbing backward rung by rung. Once the ladder had returned to the vertical, it wasn't so difficult anymore, except for the paralyzing numbness in his rubbery arms, and the ever-present shriek of the wind. Don't look down, don't look down. Rooftops didn't bother him, but this was something else entirely. The dizzying vista hovered at the periphery of his vision, tempting him to look. He kept his eyes fixed forward at his hands upon the ladder, the spray-painted graffiti on the water tower's metal flank. Joe plus Stacy, it read in yard-tall letters. His legs were shaking. The wind buffeted him, whipping and snapping his clothes like sails in a squall. His fingers were turning numb on the wind-chilled metal. He concentrated on his grip. Steady now, you're almost there. Something shifted in the corner of his vision. He turned in reflex and saw it, the goblin thing scrabbling around the side of the water tank with spidery grace, coming back for him. He let out a yell and lost his grip on the ladder. His foot slipped through the rung and wedged. The world inverted as he swung upside down, the back of his head slamming hard against the water tank. He saw the catwalk beneath him, scattered with trash, beer, bottles, a discarded sneaker, cans of spray paint. He heard the insane cackle of the goblin as it came at him. He crunched upward, contracting his hip and abdominal muscles to raise his torso high enough so that he could try to free his trapped ankle. He pulled his leg up and out and dropped suddenly, slamming down onto the catwalk with a huge metal clang. The short fall was violent enough to knock the wind out of him, and in the choking silence where his breath had been, he felt the shuddering thunk of a great weight landing on the catwalk beside him. He turned, scrambling away from the thing that was approaching, its head cocked sideways in a horrible parody of human curiosity. As the nightmare advanced on him, he realized, without understanding exactly how he knew, that it was female. He scrambled backward, his hands knocking abandoned beer bottles across the catwalk. He smelled the sour dregs of stale beer, heard the bottles rolling clear of the catwalk and dropping through the darkness. He kept going until he bumped into an iron railing and could go no further. His fumbling hands found spray paint cans the vandals had used to decorate the tower. He heard the hollow clank as the cans rolled across the catwalk, heard the distinctive rattle of the steel mixing marble inside. Contents under pressure. A chunk of memory fell on him from above. A childhood's reckless game with aerosol cans. Paul fumbled in his shirt pocket and found his Zippo. The creature took another step. With numb fingers, Paul flipped open the lighter. The creature took a step forward and brought its face in close to Paul's. Its eye gleamed back as polished stone as it blasted him with a gust of rotten breath. Paul lifted the paint can to its face and flicked the lighter. The fire erupted in a startling cone of brilliant yellow, a scorching blast that engulfed the leering face. The creature gave a furious shriek and reared back, blazing. "Burn, you son of a bitch!" Paul held the funnel of fire out before him as he climbed to his feet. The burning creature howled in her agony and thrashed out, suddenly, one black claw striking Paul hard, tipping him back over the catwalk's railing. "I'm dead," Paul thought as he fell. No time to think of Karen, or the baby he would never know, his daughter. Only the dizzying, cartwheeling sensation of falling toward a darkness that was eternal. Art sped through the dark streets of Wendell, pedaling furiously to outdistance the sirens that were just beginning to wake. He leapt the curb of Lore Avenue and dismounted smoothly, letting the 10-speed glide to a harmless collision with the Forsythus. He dashed up the front steps to Karen's porch, fumbling out the spare house key she'd given him. Inside, he hid beside the front door, peeking out through the curtains, watching for the strobing lights of police cruisers. The sirens grew distant, and he knew for the moment he was safe. Thump! His eyes shot to the stairwell at the heavy sound from above, as if someone had fallen out of bed. He hurried upstairs, and found Karen, writhing in her sodden bedsheets, alone. Where the ceiling once had been, there was now a ragged hole. He rushed to her, tugging down her nightgown. She groaned and clutched at him, surfacing from her agony long enough to whisper, "Paul! It got Paul!" The sheets were clammy and soaking, and when he looked he saw blood. At first he'd thought she was hurt, then realized that her water had broken, that the blood that soaked the bed sheets had been diluted by the rush of amniotic fluid. It was beginning. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, sliding his hands beneath her. "Put your arms around my neck." He struggled to lift her and staggered toward the bedroom door. She was unconscious by the time he got her to the garage and lay her out across the back seat. He gunned the Volvo's engine and backed out of the garage with a squeal of tires. Karen moaned from the back seat as they barreled down Lore and onto Main, headed toward Wendell General. "Baby! The baby!" she kept muttering, her eyelids fluttering. When Art turned to check on her, he saw fresh blood on the seat beneath her, and a dark spreading stain across the lower half of her nightgown. She was losing the baby, and quite possibly hemorrhaging. 10 minutes later, he pulled to a screeching halt outside Wendell General's emergency room. The automatic doors whispered open as he staggered inside with Karen in his arms. The triage nurse and two tired-looking MDs ran to meet him. He relinquished Karen to their care, backing away helplessly as the trauma staff went to work on her. When he looked down, he saw blood on his shirt. At the sight of it, he knew suddenly that he shouldn't linger here, that he would be recognized. Simultaneously with that thought, a voice called, "Sir?" Art turned, saw a security guard approaching beside another triage nurse. Art began backing away. "Wait a second, sir," the nurse said, closing the distance between them as the guard's hand went to his walkie-talkie. Art turned, sprinting out through the automatic doors.